Okay, good evening everybody. Let's start off by cultivating our motivation. And so often in our lives we think that what is happening to us is some kind of objective reality out there. So there's really nice people or really attractive people out there, or there's really mean people out there. And so we engage in this constant battle with our external environment, wanting to get things from it, wanting to push away other things from it, because we think that it is some kind of objective reality. In fact, things are not an objective reality, and our whole way of structuring our lives as this big me inside this body and this big other is everything else, that whole conceptual framework is completely erroneous. Instead, things exist dependently. They're not solid, independent, inherently existent entities. They depend on their causes and conditions. They depend on their parts. And they also depend on how our mind conceives and labels them. So our lack of understanding of this is, and our grasping at the exact opposite of it, is what is called ignorance. And that's the source of our afflicted minds of attachment and arrogance, jealousy, anger, and so forth. But that ignorance can be eliminated by realizing with wisdom how things actually exist. And then the whole artificial house of cards of our situation in cyclic existence also crumbles with that. And instead, we can, as liberated beings, devote our energy to really being of the greatest benefit to all, and being unencumbered by our own afflictions which present that, then we can, from our own side, work for the benefit of all living beings. And so, walking on that path to that goal of full enlightenment is what we're doing. And for that reason, we're going to listen to teachings on the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So generate that perspective on life so that we know what we're doing and why we're doing it when we listen to Dharma teachings. Okay, so we've been talking about the 4 establishments of mindfulness, and we've so far talked about the preliminaries, and they're specifically those 6 meditations beginning with the breath and then progressing to more subtle understandings of the breath. And that's done to just gain some initial stability and to increase our capacity for mindfulness. And then we began talking about the actual practice, and especially the first point, the observed objects, or the focal objects. Okay, so the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And then we talked about the different kinds of body, the external bodies, so the colors, shapes, and things we see. The internal bodies, the subtle material that is the foundation for the sense powers, or that is the sense powers. And then the body that is both. In other words, the actual organ, like the eyeball or the ear or the tongue, these things. Okay? And then we talked about just a basic overview of feelings as being pleasurable or happy, painful or unpleasant, suffering, and neutral, those which are neither. Then we talked about the mind being the 6 primary consciousnesses, remember? So visual, auditory, just sing if you're awake, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, and mental consciousnesses that perceives the general aspect of the object. And then under mindfulness come all of the mental factors that refine the perception or cognition of any object. And phenomena also include everything else, like the Four Noble Truths and 5 aggregates and all these different sets of different things. Okay, so the whole reason that we do this practice on the establishments of mindfulness is to eradicate the afflictions, because the afflictions are what keep us bound in cyclic existence. So that's why we do this practice. Although many people think that this practice in terms of what is done in the Theravada countries, like Thailand and Sri Lanka and so forth, actually it's also a Mahayana practice. It's done by people on the Bodhisattva path. So it's quite encompassing practice. It's kind of one of the core things that the Buddha taught. So we're going to continue on with it. The part that we're coming on now, I find it very interesting because it talks about how each of these 4 relates to our concept of self. Because as we know, our concept of self is one of our big problems. You know, there's the self-grasping of persons and there's the self-grasping of phenomena. Okay, phenomena being everything else except persons. They go together because first we grasp at the inherent existence of phenomena. Here, phenomena being the body or the mind, because they aren't the person. And then, but by grasping those phenomena as truly existent or inherently existent, as some kind of solid, independent entities, then we grasp ourselves also as a solid, independent entity. And so this grasping ourselves to exist in this way is a source of a huge amount of trouble and misery for us. Okay? So every time we're angry and upset, okay, and the mind is screaming, "Me! What are they doing to me? I can't stand that." That's, you know that line? Yeah, you do. Okay, I do too. Yeah. So that mind is, based on this grasping at ourselves as some kind of independent, inherently existent entity. Okay? And in the same way, when our mind is completely afflicted by, attachment, and I want this, I need it, I have to have it, this makes me so happy, I never want to separate from it. All that craving, clinging, attachment, sticky mind, that's also founded on this whole idea of there being this big me at the center of it all. Okay? So all of that is founded on wrong conception. And by wrong conception, I don't mean, just wrong ways of intellectual thinking, but very deep conceptual minds that grasp at things as existing in the opposite way from how they actually exist. And so, like I was saying, one of the principal things we grasp to exist in the wrong way is ourselves. Yeah? Because we think there's this big me here that definitely needs to be happy all the time, no exceptions, that needs to be protected from everything else that's going to harm it. And so we live our life from that viewpoint, don't we? There's me, and I'm going to get what I want from out there, and I'm going to push away everything I don't like, and tough luck on anybody who's in my way. Basically, isn't it? Because after all, I'm the center of the universe. The universe is so stupid it doesn't understand that. That I am the center. But it's based on this kind of wrong conception. So, that's why we're doing this practice, is to try and dissect, all this wrong way of grasping that we have, so that by dissecting it, then the ignorance grasping it incorrectly can't arise. When that doesn't arise, the other afflictions don't arise. When they don't arise, the karma, we don't create the karma to experience rebirth in cyclic existence. That's how the whole chain works. Okay? So, now our text is saying the reason these four objects are stated as the observed or focal objects is to stop the childish from grasping. And then there's four things that the childish grasp. Now, I know none of us like to be called childish. That's kind of the worst thing you can say to somebody is, you're acting so childish. But the term in Tibetan is literally, childish. It's a child. Because we usually think children are innocent and sweet and everything, but here it's referring to childish as, people who just don't understand things the way they are, who live in their own naive little world that they've created with their wrong views. So we're all childish beings, no matter how old we are. Okay, so there's four graspings that we do incorrectly here. So one is, these four establishments of mindfulness are meant to counteract these. So the first one is grasping the body to be the basis of our identity. I'll read through these four and then go back and explain them. Okay, so the first is grasping the body to be the basis of the identity or of ourself. Okay. Second is grasping the feelings to be the objects experienced by the self. Third is grasping the mind to be the actual self. And four is grasping phenomena such as attachment as afflicting the self, and phenomena such as faith and wisdom as purifying the self. Okay, so let's look at these four. So the first one, grasping the body to be the basis of the self or the identity. Okay, so when you say, who is so-and-so or where is so-and-so, what do you point to? You point to where their body is. Yeah. So the body is, when we say me, it's like me. What do? We touch our body first, isn't it? This is the basis of our identity, the foundation of our identity. Yeah. Me, this body. And we can see, just to extrapolate on that, it's not just this feeling of, okay, I'm here, meaning my body's here. But so much of our identity is created on the basis of this body. Okay? According to how old this body is, we create a whole identity of I'm young, or I'm middle-aged, or I'm, a senior citizen. Depending upon, this body, we identify as one gender or the other. Depending upon this body, we get classified into different racial groups, or sometimes different ethnic groups, depending on what the body looks like. Okay. We get classified, our identity about how athletic we are, how strong our body is, how strong we are, depends on our body. Our identity as being healthy or sick depends on this body. Our identity of, boy, I'm really attractive, or boy, I'm like, ugh, depends on the physical, what's happening with the body. So if we look, so many of our ideas about ourselves are founded on this body. I'm a person who likes to play football because the body plays football. I'm a person who has to sleep X hours, otherwise I don't function because of this body. I'm a person who's a born-again vegetarian. Or I'm a person who's an avowed meat eater, based on this body. So, all these identities created based on our body. And how we relate to other people, too, is so much based on their body. I think they did. I'd never watched Star Trek except one time, and they had. So I'm really kind of out of it. But on this one particular show, they had. I don't know, one of the guys in the thing. He, he fell in love with. No, or maybe it was a visitor. Somebody fell in love with somebody. Okay. Of the opposite sex. But then that person was from another planet or something, and they died and they were reborn in a different body, a body of the same sex as the person that fell in love with them. So then, okay, here's the person that you were so wildly in love with, but now they're the same sex as you, and they're also a little kid. So now what happens? Do you still feel the same way about him? Okay? So, we can see how much of our feelings about other people just based on their body. Especially if you're very attracted to somebody, imagine what they're going to look like when they're 80 years old. And see if you still have that same feeling of, wow, or not. Okay? So we can see, are you getting the point here? That our body is like the basis of the self. Here I am, meaning this thing is here. Okay? So that's how we grasp our body. We grasp our feelings to be the objects experienced by the self, or sometimes they translate it as the source of enjoyment of the self, the source of use of the self. What the body, basically it means what the self experiences. Okay, so the three primary, feelings that we have, and there's all different shades of them, are pleasure or happiness, displeasure, pain, unhappiness, and then neutral feelings, that which is neither happy nor suffering. So these are the things that the self experiences all day long. Yeah? Every single cognition, we're experiencing some kind of feeling. Oh, this feels good. It doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel anything. I don't feel anything. Okay? And we often are not very aware of this whole pleasure, pain, neutral thing. But we're so reactive to it. Because the moment we experience a bit of pleasure or happiness, what happens? Immediately we go into attachment. I want more. I want better. I don't want to be separated from this. Or we go into, kind of arrogance. I'm better than you are. When we experience pain, what's our immediate reaction? I don't like it, get it away, somebody else did it to me, all this kind of thing. So much anger, resentment, belligerence. And then when we have a neutral feeling, something that doesn't give us any pain, any pleasure, and we fall into, who cares? Okay? So we can see this very clearly in relationship to people, when there's somebody that we see who's attractive, who likes the same things that we like, who says nice, pleasing, ego-pleasing words. We get a happy feeling, immediately we glom onto that person. Then we meet somebody else, or that same person just on another day, or maybe even 5 minutes later, and they're in a bad mood, and we experience pain in relationship to them, and then immediately I can't stand this person, and we're so hurt, and we're angry, and we're betrayed, and everything like that. We spin off in that direction. And then everybody that we walk by on the street all day, do we even see them as living beings who have feelings? Or do we just fall directly into ignorance? They say it's a person, but, they don't really have any meaning until they cause me either pleasure or pain. Like when we read the newspaper, oh, so-and-so got killed, oh, this person died. Do we feel anything about it? Not much. It's as if they aren't even living beings to us. Okay, so these three feelings of, pleasure, pain, neutral, happiness, unhappiness, neutral, they're the objects experienced by the self. And because, we're grasping at this inherently existent self and then making it the center of the universe, we care very much about whether we experience pleasure or pain or neutral. Okay? So much so that we get attached, we get angry, and we zone out in bewilderment. So these feelings really control our lives. And we're so often kind of unaware of the feelings we're having and what our emotional reactions are to those feelings. Sometimes we'll just find ourselves angry and we'll try and trace it back. Well, how did I get angry? It's like, I can't even remember. I've just been in a bad mood all day. But there was some kind of something, some unpleasant feeling. And when we're not aware of the unpleasant feeling that was the foundation of our anger, then it's very difficult to stop being angry. And to really kind of get to the bottom of it, because we just go on with it. And the same thing with the attachment. Attachment, I always talk about attachment as like the rope through the donkey, the hook in the donkey's nose, pulling us around. And if we can't tell, what was that immediate feeling of pleasure I got? And is it really something that's so great? If we aren't aware of that, then the attachment just builds and we make all these stories and blah, 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 and do all these actions. Okay? And then the same thing for ignoring people, for just not caring. And it's not just even about strangers. Sometimes we don't even care about the people we live with. It's like, oh, you're unhappy today? I don't have time for that. I don't even notice you're unhappy today. So we just fall into ignorance, apathy. Okay? So grasping the feelings to be the objects experienced by the self, and then, of course, reacting to those feelings. Okay? So you see how all of these conceptions so far, we've just done two of them, but how they create our cyclic existence. Then the third one is grasping the mind to be the actual self. So the mind is the third object of our establishment of mindfulness, establishments of mindfulness. And when we dig a little bit deeper, although we may say, I'm here, when we really think of ourselves, what do we think of? It's our mind, isn't it? Our cognitive ability, the part of us that experiences and cognizes and perceives and generates motivations and things like this. Okay? So just that fact of being conscious, of having consciousness and being able to perceive objects, that's me. The bottom line is, that's me. So we confuse the mind and we think the mind is the actual self. And then the fourth focal object is phenomena. And here, if we think of referring specifically to the mental factors as examples of the phenomena, we think of different mental factors as either things that tarnish and pollute the self or that purify the self. So we would see things like anger or jealousy as polluting the self, as afflicting the self. And then other mental factors such as confidence or wisdom as benefiting or purifying the self. Okay. So even these different mental factors, these different states of mind, some of them are views, some are attitudes, some are emotions, but we always see them in relationship to the self. They either help me or they harm me. So when it comes to our four focal objects, body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, we're grasping all of them in relationship to the self. Okay? And so the way that we grasp them in relationship to the self is a very, very ignorant, confused way that just creates a lot of problems for us. Because we'll have a good feeling, or maybe, okay, let's take a mental factor like anger, okay? Or I'm just really enraged, I'm just really ticked off at somebody, Well, that's afflicting me. I don't want to be angry. I want this anger to go away. Yeah? So we react to the anger. Or we encourage the anger. Oh, my anger makes me feel so strong. Now I have power. I'm angry. Okay? Or things like wisdom. Oh, I want to develop wisdom, and we cling to wisdom. This inherently existent wisdom. I'm going to be wise. Then when I'm wise, everybody will think well of me, or whatever it is. Okay? So we see the mental factors here as examples of phenomena, and they either afflict the self or they benefit the self, purify the self. Okay? So when we understand this, then that helps us understand why the four establishments of mindfulness are about those four objects. Okay? Yeah, because right now we're just in the section kind of like, why are we focusing on these four objects anyway? What are they? Why are we focusing on them? Okay, so we, to just review that part, we conceive ourselves to be a personal entity. There's me, okay? And from when we really look at that, then we can see how we sense this body to exist, and how this body is the basis of this feeling of me. Okay, and how the feelings are the things that are so important to us. Feeling happy, feeling miserable. Okay, and then how I usually identify our mind as being the self, and how we identify all other phenomena as things that are either virtuous and benefit the self, or as non-virtuous and harm the self. So they either disturb and defile the self, the big I, or they help and benefit me. Mm-hmm. So here's our basic conception of the universe that we operate under all day long, and we don't even realize it's a conception because we think it's reality. So what is that conception? There is a big me here in this body, and the external things cause pain and pleasure, and so I react to them. The real thing I am is my mind, my ability to cognize. We make that into some kind of soul that's going to go on. And then all of our different moods, oh, I'm depressed today, oh, I'm elated today, all of our moods, our mental factors are things that harm or benefit us. And so with that basic framework, of a conception of I and how these four things relate to the I, then, we go through the day interacting with other people and other objects in quite often unhealthy ways. Okay. So these four conceptions, we didn't arrive at in a conscious way. It's not like we sat down one day and said, I'm going to think about these four and how they relate to the self, and I'm going to construct a worldview. No, this is just kind of innate stuff that's been there since beginningless time. And we don't even regard these as mistaken. Yeah, not at all. We think they're completely true. And so the four establishments of mindfulness are a direct remedial force to these four mistaken conceptions. And in the process of it, they help us to see that there's no solid, inherently existent self to start with. So the thing that all these things are spinning around, we see that thing, that big self, is fictitious. It doesn't exist in the way it appears. Okay, so the compendium of knowledge by who? Asanga says, furthermore, they, meaning the four, are the things that are the dwelling place of the self, so that's the body, the basis for the enjoyment or use of the self, that's the feelings, the actual self, that's the mind, and the things that afflict and purify the self, so that's phenomena. Okay? So, that's why we're meditating on these four, because they're going to be the direct antidote to our grasping at self and to the grasping at phenomena as inherently existent. Okay, another way of looking at these four observed objects or four focal objects, the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, is in terms of the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so the first noble truth is the truth of suffering, the truth of dukkha. Yeah, which of the four do you think relates to that most? The body. Okay. Then the second noble truth, the origin of dukkha, the origin of our unsatisfactory experiences. Yeah, that's feelings. Yeah, because the feelings are what we react to. That starts this, this whole thing. Remember in the 12 links, right after the link of feeling, that's where you get clinging and craving, and then so on. Okay. Then the true cessation, the third noble truth, that is in relationship to the mind, because it's the emptiness of the undefiled mind that is a true cessation. Okay? People say, what is nirvana? Yeah, the emptiness of the undefiled mind is nirvana. So the mind is correlated with true cessations, the third noble truth. Fourth noble truth, the path, and this is correlated with phenomena because the mental factors, there's certain mental factors that we need to really enhance. Those are the path to liberation. Yeah? When you sit and think of it, what's the path to liberation? It's just enhancing certain mental factors. Yeah? Enhancing certain mental factors, and in the process of doing so, it overcomes the afflictions and the distorted mental factors that we have. Okay? So that's how these four also can be correlated with the Four Noble Truths. And so that also shows why these four are very important objects for us to establish mindfulness on. And so remember, mindfulness does not mean just bare observation, but mindfulness is coupled with discriminating wisdom. It's mindfulness that is able to penetrate the reality of these things. Okay, so that's the first point in the outline, which is the observed objects or focal objects. If you have your root text with you, you'll see that. Okay, then the second point is the manner of meditation. How do we meditate on these four? Okay, now there's two manners of meditation. There is the common manner of meditation and the uncommon manner of meditation. So the common manner here is actually referring to how everybody meditates on them, and the uncommon manner as to how bodhisattvas meditate on them. Okay, so now we're going to go into the first point, the common manner of meditation, and we're going to spend a long time on this first point of the common manner of meditation. And it actually has two subdivisions too. Okay? So one is the general characteristics of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, and then the specific characteristics of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Okay? So within the manner of meditation, there's two subdivisions, common and uncommon. Within common manner of meditation, there's two subdivisions, the general characteristics, the specific characteristics. Okay? And then within those, we're going to get into further points. Okay? First, so the text says, the common manner of meditation is done by examining both the general and specific characteristics of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. The Treasury of Knowledge by Vasubandhu states, we should meditate on establishment of mindfulness by thoroughly examining the two characteristics of body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Okay, so first, Chokyi Gyaltsen states it, and then he quotes an ancient Indian source to kind of say, look, I'm not making this up. Vasubandhu said it, Asanga said it. Okay, so the principal function of the four establishments, we were saying, is to eradicate the afflictions so that we can become liberated beings. So there's two layers of afflictions. There's the manifest afflictions, and then there's the like the seeds of the afflictions, which are more subtle. So we meditate on the specific characteristics of our four objects in order to subdue the manifest afflictions, and we meditate on the general characteristics in order to eradicate those afflictions altogether. So the specific characteristics, actually the text is going to go on and talk about the general characteristics first, even though it says here that in our practice we actually begin by meditating on the specific characteristics. And the reason is, Because if we understand the general characteristics, we're going to understand where we're going. And then we meditate on the specific characteristics, because those are going to be the things that we have to really put into practice until we fully understand the general characteristics. Because the specific characteristics, that's when we're going to meditate on the foulness of the body and, you know, all those lovely meditations dissecting the body and imagining corpses and, you know, those kinds of things. Yeah, those ones you like, right? Okay. So first, let's just talk briefly about the general characteristics. So these general characteristics, they're going to apply to all four when, you know, body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, when we're talking about the polluted or contaminated aspect of all four. Polluted or contaminated meaning that it's under the influence of ignorance. Okay, so the general characteristics, okay, impermanence, dukkha, or unsatisfactory, suffering, empty, and selfless. Okay? So those four, you know, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths and the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, each of the Noble Truths has 4 aspects. These 4 are the 4 aspects of true dukkha. Okay? So we're seeing here impermanence in a very specific way, you know, as it's applying to cyclic existence. We're not going to be thinking of the impermanence of the Buddha's mind because it's a created thing. You know, we're talking specifically here in terms of cyclic existence. Okay, so where else have we heard these 4 of impermanence, dukkha, empty, and selfless? Yeah, they're related to the 4 distortions and the 4 seals. Okay, so the 4 distortions that we have are grasping impermanent things as permanent, things that are by nature unsatisfactory as happy, yeah? Things, actually it's interesting because the other distortion is seeing things that are foul as beautiful. And that usually is paired with empty as the antidote, although sometimes it's paired with seeing it as dukkha as the antidote. Depends. And then seeing things that have no self as having a self. Okay, so those are the 4 distortions. But then they come up in terms of the 4 seals too. Okay, so the first of the 4 seals, all conditioned things are impermanent. Second one is all polluted things are unsatisfactory, are dukkha. And third is all phenomena are empty and selfless. So those are the first 3 of the 4 seals, and the 4th seal is nirvana is peace. Okay? So the 4 seals are the teachings that establish any tenet system as Buddhist. So if you're going to call yourself as a Buddhist, then these 4 seals have to apply to, you know, what you're believing, what you're stating as your core beliefs. Yeah. So if you say all conditioned things are permanent, yeah. Because in ancient India there were a lot of things, you know, the sound of the Vedas is permanent. Yeah, that's why we always hear this thing, you know, the syllogism, sound is impermanent because it's a product of causes. Because in ancient India, you know, the sound was permanent. The sound of the Vedas was permanent. Okay, so all conditioned things are impermanent. If you think they're permanent, you're not going to be a Buddhist. All polluted phenomena are unsatisfactory. So all things under the influence of ignorance are unsatisfactory. Yeah. Now, does our society believe that as a society? That everything under the influence of ignorance is unsatisfactory? No. We think, that a lot of the things that are under ignorance are going to bring us everlasting happiness. Okay? And then all phenomena are empty and selfless. Again, does our society agree with that one? No, everything has a real nature. This is it. Okay, so the commentary on the treasury of knowledge states, their specific characteristics are their individual natures. Okay? And we'll get into that. The general characteristics are that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, all polluted phenomena are unsatisfactory, and all phenomena are empty and selfless. Okay, and then after that we get into the specific characteristics, but I think it's better to hold on that until next week. Okay, so these 4 seals are actually quite important, and we did a whole workshop on them. It was last Labor Day, wasn't it? Last year? Okay, and if we really understand these 4 seals, it very radically changes how we look at things. They very much challenge our everyday knowledge of stuff, because on an everyday way, we just feel kind of permanent, don't we? I mean, if somebody asked us, are you permanent or impermanent? We'd say, well, my body's impermanent. But when somebody dies, when their body stops functioning, we're so shocked, aren't we? Because their body's impermanent. And that's just, death is gross impermanence. We're not even understanding the subtle impermanence there. But how we hold everything to be really very permanent. If we have a relationship with somebody, this is the way the relationship is always going to be. It's permanent. It's like this. If we have a house, we buy insurance, but that doesn't happen to us because our house is permanent. And here we're just talking about gross impermanence. Yeah. I mean, with the stuff that is so obvious, you drop something and it breaks, and we're always kind of surprised when it breaks, aren't we? Yeah, well, how did that break? Or the light bulb, kind of goes out. How did that happen? That wasn't supposed to happen. Yeah, so we just look, and in an ordinary way, how out of touch with reality our mind is. That how things work is not at all what we expect. We expect everything to be quite permanent. At the same time, we live in something that not only it has subject to gross impermanence of things, being born and dying, or being created and being destroyed, but just the moment by moment change that's happening without stop, constantly. Yeah, just moment to moment change. And that things don't exist for more than a moment. Yeah, the very moment they're arising, they're also disintegrating. It's hard to understand, isn't it? Yeah, we think, well, at least they should arise and then stay for a split second, and then they can disintegrate after that. But no, the very moment they're arising, they're also disintegrating. Because if we think they arise, then they stay for a moment, then we're saying they arise, which is impermanence. They stay, so they're permanent, at least for a moment. Then they disintegrate again and go back to being impermanent. Huh? Does that make any sense? No. Okay. So it's just the momentary existence of everything is its arising and ceasing moment by moment. Do we feel that way about ourselves? Do we feel that way about this room? No. Yeah? So even in this, we're not even talking about ultimate truth. Just even this, we can see how our everyday mind is very far from the reality of things. So when Buddhism says we're ignorant, this can give us some idea of how our mind is not perceiving the reality of stuff. Okay? All things under the influence of ignorance, all polluted things are in the nature of dukkha, are unsatisfactory. Now, anything that is under the influence of ignorance is unsatisfactory by nature. It lacks the power to bring us any kind of, long-lasting security or joy. But is that the way we see things? Your IRA account or your 401k, first of all, that's permanent, ha ha ha. Okay? We thought it was permanent, ha ha ha. But we think that's going to bring us everlasting happiness. Is that going to bring you everlasting happiness? Oh, you don't know what IRAs and 401, these are like, how do you describe them? What? Retirement accounts, yeah. Okay. So you think that having, these are going to make you happy, or you think having a certain relationship with a certain person, this is going to make me happy. If only this person loved me, if only they loved me, then I'll live happily ever after. And yet, this person is under the influence of ignorance. Remember we were talking about that one sutra where the Buddha was talking about the noble search and the ignoble search? And the ignoble search is, me who is under the influence of defilements, seeking happiness in somebody else or something else under the influence of defilements. That's exactly what this one is, seeing things under the polluted things as satisfactory, as bringing happiness. Not going to work, okay? And this is why so many people, I think, as they age, they get kind of bitter and depressed because they did all these things and they thought, this is really going to make me happy. I'm going to have this career, I'm going to be successful, I'm going to have this relationship, and it's going to bring me happiness, I'm going to have these kids, and, that'll bring me some kind of ultimate meaning. I'm going to have these possessions, and then I'll be regarded as successful. And so they work so hard to get these things, and then none of these things pan out to be the long-lasting superstar happiness that we thought they were going to be. And then people not knowing anything about Dharma, not knowing how to work with their own mind, and that happiness and suffering come from within their own mind, then they fall into depression and feel like life is worthless. When in fact, they have a human body, they have human intelligence, they could do so much if they have wisdom, but they can't even see that. They just sit and feel bitter and disappointed and depressed. Quite sad, quite sad. Okay, and then, seeing all phenomena as empty and selfless. Again, we don't do that. We think everything has its own inherent nature. Yeah, that all these things are real, out there, objective. So therefore, I got to get them, and I got to push them away. And so every experience we have, it feels so real while it's happening, doesn't it? Whatever conflict we have with somebody, this is a real, inherently existent conflict. I'm perceiving reality, when actually we're making up a story in our own mind. Or, well, this is so wonderful, I have to have it. We're making up a story, thinking everything's inherently existent, but we don't realize it. Okay? It brings a lot of suffering. So the four establishments of mindfulness are, definitely going to be helpful here in adjusting our mind and making our mind more realistic. Yeah? And in the process of making it more realistic, it doesn't make us more depressed. Some people initially feel like, oh, everything I thought was going to be happy, now you're telling me isn't going to make me happy. Woe is me, you know, I have no reason to live. Well, actually, you have a whole lot of reason to live. So we have to really see what our human potential is and what we can do with our human intelligence and value that and appreciate that. Okay, so maybe some time for questions or comments? Yeah.
I have a question about the realization of impermanence.
Uh-huh.
And where, I mean, we learn a lot about the realization of emptiness and how it comes about and what it looks like, but where does the realization of impermanence fit in the picture?
Okay, so we learn a lot about the realization of emptiness and how you create it and when it comes on the path. And what about the realization of impermanence? According to the Prasangika school, even ordinary beings can have a realization of impermanence. Okay? So it means it can happen, you know, path of accumulation, path of preparation. It can probably even happen before you enter a path. You know, depending on your level of concentration, depending on what kind of wisdom that you have. And then, of course, there's different levels of realization of impermanence. There's, you know, the correct inferential understanding, which is going to come first, and then there's the direct perception of emptiness.
Is it the path on the way to emptiness? I mean,
yeah, you're going to realize impermanence before you realize emptiness. When we're talking about direct perception, I think. Yeah.
I guess my question is, does it have to be cultivated specifically, independently, separately, or is it a byproduct?
No, you cultivate it separately.
Okay.
Yeah.
With regard to contaminated phenomena and the nature of suffering, what do we do then with like the pictures and images of the Buddha?
Ah, okay. So where do the pictures and images of the Buddha fill in these? I'm not quite sure. I would think that they would, it depends on how you see them. If you see them as art objects, then they're going to probably fall under being polluted phenomena, if you see them as art objects. If you see them as, you know, there's one practice where you see the statues as actual Buddhas, and some people can receive teachings from statues when you're on high levels of the path. You know, when you have single-pointed concentration, some people can receive teachings from statues. So those probably wouldn't be included as true sufferings.
So about everything in between those two.
Huh?
Like everything else, like.
Oh,
like
everything else, the telephone, the table, all of these things are contaminated.
I don't see it as art, but I also don't see it with single-pointed concentration.
Right.
I'm somewhere.
Yeah, right, somewhere in between. I don't know, we should ask about that one, I'm not quite sure.
Can you introduce this part about the uncommon and the common matter? I kind of got lost on the part of, you said the specific characteristics. You do that first, and that's in order to eradicate.
No, I said that we have the common and uncommon.
Right.
And under the common, we have two subdivisions, the general and the specific. And we meditate on the specific ones to counteract the manifest afflictions that are already very gross and present in our mind. And we contemplate the general characteristics, impermanence, dukkha, emptiness, and selflessness, in order to eradicate the afflictions altogether. Okay. In the Theravada tradition, you often hear them talk about the three characteristics. Yeah, impermanence, dukkha, and selfless. So that comes to the same point.
I'm a little confused from the topic last week with the last of the 6 preliminary practices.
Yeah.
In the transforming, you said that brings you through this path of preparation, and you gain the realization, conceptual realization of emptiness, and then in the purifying practice, then you actually, that's path of seeing.
Path of seeing, and yet they call these preliminary practices.
Right, and then all these are formable truth and
Yeah. So one thing you very quickly learn when studying Buddhist scripture, that just because they give a heading to a certain list doesn't mean that everything in the list applies, that the heading applies to everything in the list. Okay? So, we said, oh, this is a preliminary practice, but wait a minute, the last one is the path of seeing. Okay, I heard one Lama once said, symmetry is stupid. Okay, so this is the thing. I mean, and whenever you study subdivisions in Buddhist texts, we think, okay, class A has 3 divisions. So we expect all 3 divisions to be discrete little entities, like 3 little balls, a blue ball, an orange ball, and a pink ball, okay? But actually, the first category, has 5 subdivisions, and the first subdivision is has the same name as the second category that is level with. And the second subdivision has the name of something that's completely different that you can't understand how it even comes in there. And then, so just be aware of that when we come to making categories, and just because something has a certain name doesn't mean it is that thing. Yeah, and I used to think when I heard this in Buddhist scriptures, because there's this one of, okay, a consciousness, according to the Prasangikas, okay, the eye, what would it be an example? An eye object perceiving blue snow mountains is valid with respect to its appearing object, blue snow mountains. It's valid with respect to that. It's a valid cognizer with respect to that, but it's not a valid cognizer. Because you can't apprehend blue snow mountains, they don't exist. And I used to think, that's kind of dumb, but then we have like fool's gold, and fool's gold isn't gold. So, so then it made me think, okay, something can be a valid cognizer with respect to its own appearing object, but not be a valid cognizer. So it just means, when we understand this thing about fool's gold isn't gold, then that gives us an example in our own culture where we can understand how labels aren't always nice, discrete, matching things.
So I had another question that what you just said seems like it relates to, but when you were speaking about the momentariness, so subtle impermanence, that things are disintegrating as they arise. And my question was, why is there such a strong observed continuity to an object?
Oh,
and
okay.
Is it appearing that way but not validly perceived?
Okay, so if things are actually arising and disintegrating in each moment, how come they appear as a continuity to us? Okay, first of all, our ignorance. Our minds are clouded by ignorance, so they appear in a way that they don't exist. And even on a scientific level, the scientists tell us that, our brain fills in certain gaps in our perceptual field. Yeah, like where our optic nerve connects to the retina, it's actually a black spot in our vision, but we don't see, unless you're really careful, you usually don't see that black spot because the brain kind of puts it together. And the same way with our eyes, we blink. Do we see things blacking out? No. Yeah. They appear as a continuity to us. So on the level of sense perception and brain activity, and then also with ignorance. So the way to get a direct perception of impermanence is through developing very refined concentration, because then when the mind has very, very subtle single-pointedness, then it can actually see the arising and passing away of something moment by moment.
Not visually see, but
Mentally, with your mental consciousness. It's a yogic direct perception. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the Four Seals, you were saying that the third is
All phenomena are
selfless
empty and selfless, yeah.
Aren't those two synonyms?
Okay, so aren't empty and selfless synonyms? According to the Prasangika, they are, but not according to all schools.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of put there in case
Yeah.
some people
Yeah.
see them as different.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay, we have to stop now. We're over time. Write your questions down and then give them to me, and I'll answer them at the beginning of the next thing.